Frank came and did a consult for us.
Yes.
I had been a patient in there. I was mugged, and I was very sick. Frank and they came and did a consult for us in the hospital. That's where we met.
Mary Ann signed her name on trust documents that moved $1 billion past the IRS while she was partially blind and partially deaf from a mugging over $14. She co-executed the largest documented tax maneuver in her family's history from a house she never owned, inside a marriage where her job was to collect laundry quarters from a Rolls Royce. Then a stranger in Scotland opened a drawer, and suddenly, the marriage everyone thought they understood looked very different. The signature that moved $1 billion. Most people who hear the name Mary Ann McLeod Trump get a version of her that sounds like a bedtime story. The poor Scottish girl who came to America with nothing and married a millionaire. It is a beautiful summary, and almost none of it holds up once you look at what she actually did inside that marriage, especially toward the end. In 1992, the Trump family incorporated a company called All County Building Supply and Maintenance. It had no real offices. Its listed address belonged to a family confidant. Its stated purpose was to purchase boilers, cleaning supplies, and appliances for Fred Trump's buildings across Brooklyn and Queens. According to the New York Times investigation that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2019, All County did none of that. What it did was take purchases that Fred's own employees had already made at negotiated prices and run them through the books a second time with markups of 20, 50, and sometimes 100%. The inflated money flowed to All County's owners, who were Fred and Mary Ann's children and a nephew. No gift tax, no paper trail that looked like a gift, just invoices wearing a costume. And there was a second layer that rarely gets discussed. Fred used those padded numbers to justify rent increases in rent-regulated buildings. Tenants in Brooklyn and Queens paid more every month so that the landlord's children could receive untaxed wealth disguised as business expenses. Real families absorbed real cost increases so that a transfer worth over $1 billion could avoid a tax bill of roughly $550 million. The family paid $52.2 million instead. In 1995, Fred and Mary Ann each executed trust arrangements that transferred the empire to their children while valuing that empire on paper at $41.4 million. The real worth was closer to $1 billion. Trump's attorney, Charles J. Harder, denied any fraud or tax evasion and called the Times reporting extremely inaccurate. But every document the Times cited was generated and filed by the Trumps themselves. And Mary Ann was not a bystander watching this from the kitchen. She was a signatory. The instruments moved because she signed them. The woman who arrived in New York in 1930 with $50 and one word written beside her name on a federal immigration form, spent the final decade of her life as a principal in one of the most sophisticated wealth transfers ever documented in American real estate. She did this while carrying permanent injuries from a mugging that netted her attacker $14. You probably did not know any of that, and the reason you did not know it is because every version of this woman that circulates in American culture treats her as scenery. But the paperwork tells a completely different story. And it starts not in New York, but on an island where the sea had already taken everything. The island that ran out of futures. Mary Ann McLeod was born on May 10, 1912, in the village of Tong on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, which is about as far northwest as you can travel in Britain before you fall off the edge. She was the youngest of 10 children in a Gaelic-speaking household. Her father, Malcolm, was a crofter, a fisherman, and the compulsory attendance officer at the local school, which meant part of his job was knocking on doors and asking parents why their children had not shown up. On New Year's Day, 1919, when Mary Ann was 6 years old, A naval yacht called the HMY Yolaire ran onto rocks at the entrance to Stornoway Harbor, carrying over 280 servicemen home from the war. More than 200 of them drowned within 20 yards of the shore, many wearing heavy army overcoats with pockets full of presents for families waiting on the quayside. Lewis had already lost roughly 17% of its servicemen in the First World War, one of the highest proportions in Britain. So Mary Ann grew up in a place that had run out of husbands. That is not poetry. That is a census. At 14, she saw a newspaper article about a girl in Dundee named Agnes Stiven, who had won a painting competition. The paper printed the winner's address. Mary Ann wrote to her from hundreds of miles away. They became pen pals, kept writing for years, and met in person in Glasgow before Mary Ann sailed. Those letters survived for decades, and a BBC Alba documentary called Mathair a Chin Sweetie was later built around them. Agnes's granddaughter, the artist Kathy Brett, helped tell the story. Those letters are the only body of writing in Mary Ann's own hand that the Trump family never controlled, never sealed, and never made anyone sign an agreement about. She was issued immigration visa number 26,698 at Glasgow, boarded the RMS Transylvania, and docked in New York one day after her 18th birthday. On the passenger list, her occupation is one word: domestic. She declared she was staying permanently. Her son would later say she came on holiday and just never left, which sounds romantic and is flatly contradicted by the federal form she signed with her own hand. The lie she married into. She worked as a domestic servant for at least 4 years in wealthy Manhattan homes. There is a partially supported claim she worked at the Andrew Carnegie Mansion on Fifth Avenue. Whether or not that specific detail is confirmed, the category is not in dispute. She cleaned, she minded children. She moved through the homes of rich New Yorkers while belonging to none of them. She studied, at extremely close range, how money moved through a household and who was allowed to touch it. In the mid-1930s, at a dance in Queens, she met Fred Trump. He was already wealthy, already building at scale, and already living inside a fabrication. Fred's family had been telling people for years that they were Swedish. His cousin and family historian John Walter told the New York Times that Fred invented the Swedish ancestry after the Second World War because you do not sell apartments if you are German. The truth was that Fred's father, Friedrich, had immigrated from the German village of Karlstadt in 1885. Donald repeated the lie in his 1987 book, The Art of the Deal. And biographer Gwenda Blair reported that while working on that book, Donald asked his father directly whether he had to keep doing the Swedish thing. So when Mary Ann married Fred on January 11, 1936, she was not just joining a man. She was entering a family that had already decided the truth about itself was a liability. A fair-haired Presbyterian girl from the British Isles standing next to a German-American landlord was not merely a love match. It was also a strategic asset. Both things ran at once, and they never stopped running for 63 years. The wedding was 25 guests at Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. The Stornoway Gazette ran it back home, describing white satin and orchids and lilies of the valley. The island got the fairy tale. The island did not get the guest list. 25 people for a man who was already one of the largest builders in Queens. The honeymoon was 2 days in Atlantic City because Fred had business, and then they moved into his mother's house. Elizabeth Christ Trump was already Mrs. Trump. She held the company's name and had been the legal signatory that made the family firm possible when Fred was too young to sign contracts. Mary Ann's first act as a wealthy man's wife was to live in a house she did not run, under the authority of a woman who had held it for a decade. The cage with a Rolls Royce. By 1940, a census taker recorded a detail that tells you everything about how far she had come and how little had actually changed. Living with the Trumps, employed by them, was a Scottish domestic servant. 10 years after Mary Ann signed her own name beside the word domestic, she had a Scottish maid. The success story was complete and printed in a single line on a government form. But what she had actually gained was a position inside a machine, not independence from one. Money stayed with Fred. The company bore Elizabeth's name and ran under Fred's control. Mary Ann had a title: the wife. The family story goes that she drove to the apartment buildings in her Rolls Royce with vanity plates reading MMT and collected coins from the laundry machines. Harry Hurt III attributed that routine to her. Other accounts give the same task to Elizabeth. Donald has told a version where he did it as a boy. The fact that nobody can agree which woman performed the task is the most revealing part of the story. The task was fixed. The woman doing it was interchangeable. In 1948, the birth of Robert, their fifth child, nearly killed her. She hemorrhaged after delivery. An emergency hysterectomy followed, then peritonitis, then surgery after surgery. Her daughter Mary Ann told biographer Gwenda Blair there were 4 operations in something like 2 weeks. Mary Ann was 11. Her father came home and told her that her mother was not expected to live, but that she should go to school and he would call if anything changed. Fred sat on the board of Jamaica Hospital. He used one of the few car telephones in New York at the time to track down a surgeon from Columbia's medical school and drove to get the man himself. He deployed every resource available to save her body and told his daughter to carry on as if it were a normal Tuesday. Mary L. Trump explained this in her ABC interview with George Stephanopoulos years later. Her grandfather was an adherent of Norman Vincent Peale's doctrine of positive thinking, she said. It allowed room for nothing else. There are times when we are legitimately distressed, legitimately in pain, she said, and to be prevented from feeling those feelings honestly and openly is a form of torture. My grandmother was in agony much of the time. Mary Ann survived. She was 36. She would never have another child, and the surgeries left damage that compounded for the rest of her life, including severe osteoporosis and repeated hip surgeries in her later decades. For months, the mother of the household was in a hospital, and the rule in the household was that nobody was permitted to be upset about it. The son who died alone. The one thing the family machine could not process was a child who refused to play his assigned position. Fred Jr. was the eldest son, named for his father, built to inherit the business. He did not want it. He wanted to fly. He became a pilot for TWA, and he was reportedly very good at it. And his father treated the entire pursuit as a humiliation. There is a line attributed to Fred Sr. that has hardened into family scripture, that Donald was worth 10 of him. Donald himself told the Washington Post in 2019 that he regretted the pressure. "I do regret having put pressure on him," he said. "It was just not his thing. The mistake we made was we assumed everybody would like it. There was a sort of double pressure put on him." Fred Jr. drank. The drinking destroyed his career, then his marriage. Eventually, he was living in the unfurnished attic of his parents' house in Jamaica Estates, doing maintenance work on his father's buildings. His mother was downstairs. Her eldest son was upstairs in a room with no furniture. They were in the same building. This went on for years. On September 26, 1981, Fred Jr. died of a heart attack at 42. Mary L. Trump, who was 16 at the time, has said in her book and in interviews that her father died completely alone in a hospital and that Donald went to a movie that night. She described calling her grandfather and being told her father was sick, but it was not serious. She pressed him. "Is it his heart?" "Yes, it is his heart." "Well then, it is serious." "Yes, it is serious." "But do not worry about it," he said. "Call your mother in the morning." 2 minutes later, she learned her father had been dead for 2 hours. In every account from every side of the family, there is no mention of Mary Ann Sarah being at her son's bedside when he died 10 minutes from her house. $14 and the last silence. On October 31st, 1991, Mary Ann was walking near a Queens supermarket on her way to pick up a crumb cake from a bakery. She was 79. A 16-year-old named Paul Locasto knocked her to the ground and grabbed her handbag. There were $14 inside. A Wonder Bread driver named Lawrence Herbert saw it happen, chased the teenager through an underground passage, and recovered the bag. Locasto was sentenced to 3 to 9 years. Mary Ann suffered fractured ribs, a brain hemorrhage, and permanent damage to her vision and hearing. Donald invited Herbert to dinner at the Plaza Hotel and offered him a job. Herbert had been working 3 jobs to save his home from foreclosure. Years later, Donald used his mother's mugging to open a chapter of his book, The America We Deserve, as a policy argument about crime. The one time Mary Ann appeared in the record as a person things happened to, it was immediately repurposed. Fred Trump died on June 25, 1999, at 93. Fred Jr.'s children, Fred III and Mary, contested the will. The family's response was to cut off their medical insurance. Fred III had a newborn son, William, born hours after the funeral, who was having seizures and needed months of intensive neonatal care. William was later diagnosed with a rare neurological condition. The family called his round-the-clock care expensive babysitting and suggested Fred III take a CPR course. Fred III told the New York Daily News, "These are not warm and fuzzy people. They never even came to see William in the hospital. Our family puts the fun in dysfunctional." Mary Ann was alive through all of it. She died on August 7, 2000, at 88. Her great-grandson's medical coverage had been turned into leverage against her dead son's children while she was still breathing. The letters. No Trump ever controlled. The Times found the all-county trail through a public document. Mary Ann Trump Barry filed an unredacted financial disclosure during her confirmation to the federal bench, and a reporter spotted a $1 million entry to all-county building supply and maintenance and pulled the thread. The family's own paperwork cracked the case open. Mary Ann retired in 2019, halting a misconduct inquiry. Then she was secretly recorded by her niece calling her brother a liar with no principles. Donald sued for $100 million. In 1995, Agnes Stephen was watching a documentary about Donald Trump in her home in Dundee. His mother's maiden name came up. Agnes recognized her childhood pen pal from 60 years earlier. They reconnected and stayed in contact until Mary Ann's death. Agnes kept every letter, the ones from a 14-year-old on Lewis and the ones that came decades later. Nobody in the Trump family signed off on those letters. Nobody bought them, sealed them, or drafted a non-disclosure agreement. The only record of Mary Ann's own voice that survives outside her husband's world exists because a girl who won a painting contest in 1926 held on to her mail, and because a woman who had crossed an ocean buried a son and signed documents that moved $1 billion still wanted at 83 to hear from someone who had known her before any of it. In a 1997 interview with Australian television, Marianne said of her son, "I do not think the life of a politician would suit him. He is too used to doing things his way and doing them right." Years earlier, during the public humiliation of Donald's affair with Marla Maples, she reportedly turned to Ivana and asked, according to a 1990 Vanity Fair profile, "What kind of son have I created?" On January 20th, 2017, Donald placed his hand on the Bible she gave him in 1955 when he finished Sunday school at First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica, Queens. A revised standard version with his name embossed on the cover and her handwriting on the inside. She had been dead 17 years. It is the only possession of hers that has ever appeared on the steps of the Capitol. A gift that costs nothing, proves nothing, and can be photographed. She would have understood exactly why they chose it. If you think you know Marianne McLeod Trump, tell me which version of her you were given and who was telling the story. Drop it in the comments.